1948. Mount Olivet Church, Harlem. Bumpy Johnson touched a dead woman's neck in front of 400 people. White makeup rubbed off on his hand rope marks the coroner had signed away as heart failure. 6 seconds. Nobody moved. 72 hours later. The cop who signed that paper disappeared. So how did one touch at a funeral bring down the whole damn system? Mount Olivet Baptist Church smelled like lilies and lies on a Sunday afternoon in March 1948. 378 people packed into wooden pews built for 200. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. Women in black dresses fanning themselves with funeral programs that cost 12 cents to print. The coffin sat closed at the front. Mahogany with brass handles polished so bright they caught the light coming through stained glass windows that hadn't been cleaned since 1944. Reverend Thomas Price stood at the pulpit reading Psalm 23 in a voice that shook on every third word. He was 61 years old, been preaching in Harlem for 32 years, buried more people than he baptized. His hands gripped the sides of the pulpit hard enough that his knuckles went white, and his eyes kept darting to the closed coffin like it might open on its own. Sadie May Washington was supposed to have died of a heart attack at 34 years old. That's what the death certificate said, signed by Dr. Edmund Walsh from the city coroner's office at 4:17 p.m. on March 9th. Heart failure, no autopsy required. Body released to family within 6 hours. Her brother Marcus sat in the front row wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, borrowed from a cousin, staring at nothing. The makeup artist at Hartley Funeral Home had used an entire jar of foundation on Sadie's neck. Professional mourners knew what that meant. You don't need 3 layers of powder to cover up heart failure. Bumpy Johnson sat in the back row on the left side, exactly where he always sat when he came to Mount Olivet. He wore a charcoal suit from a tailor on 125th Street who knew better than to ask questions about bloodstains. His hands rested on his knees, completely still, while everyone else shifted and coughed and whispered. At 2:43 p.m., exactly 14 minutes into Reverend Price's eulogy, Bumpy stood up. The entire church went silent in 3 seconds flat. He didn't say a word. Just walked down the center aisle with footsteps that echoed off walls like gunshots. 250 people held their breath. He reached the coffin and stopped. His right hand came up, rested on the mahogany lid for 5 seconds. Then he lifted the lid with both hands, slow and deliberate, hinges creaking like bones breaking. Sadie's body lay on white satin, hands folded across her chest. The makeup was professional work, smooth and even, covering her throat from jawline to collarbone. Bumpy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white handkerchief, folded into a perfect square. He pressed the handkerchief against Sadie's neck and dragged it down 6 inches. The powder came off on the fabric in streaks like dirty snow. Underneath, rope burns circled her throat in purple-black lines, deep enough that you could see where the fibers bit into skin. A woman in the 3rd row screamed. Another fainted, hit the floor hard enough that people 2 pews over heard her skull crack against wood. Men stood up and sat back down, not knowing what to do with their hands. Bumpy turned and looked at Morton Hartley, the funeral director, standing near the side door. Hartley was 48, ran his business for 20 years, knew every cop and judge in Harlem. His face went gray like cement. Sweat broke out across his forehead even though the church was cold. "Who told you to cover this up?" Bumpy's voice carried to every corner without him raising it. Hartley's mouth opened and closed twice before sound came out. "Nobody told me nothing. I just made her presentable. With 3 layers of foundation." Bumpy held up the handkerchief, stained with powder and something darker underneath. "Heart attack victims don't need their necks hidden." Reverend Price gripped the pulpit so hard the wood groaned. 2 uniformed cops stood at the back of the church, near the door. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They looked at each other once and then looked away. Bumpy folded the handkerchief and put it back in his pocket. He closed the coffin lid with both hands, gentle as putting a child to bed. Then he turned and walked back down the aisle, past 378 people who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. He stopped at Marcus Washington's pew. Marcus looked up with eyes that hadn't slept in 4 days. Bumpy put one hand on the young man's shoulder and squeezed once. "Your sister didn't die of a heart attack, and whoever decided she did is going to answer for it." Marcus nodded, couldn't speak, tears running down his face. Bumpy walked out through the front doors into March sunlight that felt too bright for what just happened inside. Behind him, the church stayed silent. Nobody sang. Nobody prayed. Nobody moved, because everyone understood what they witnessed. Bumpy Johnson just declared war on whoever killed Sadie May Washington, and in Harlem, when Bumpy declared war, bodies stacked up until the message was clear. Bumpy's office sat above a barbershop on Lenox Avenue, 3 flights up, windows facing south so you could see who was coming before they reached the door. The room was 12 by 14 feet, 1 desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet that stayed locked. No photographs on the walls, no personal items, just business. Illinois Gordon knocked twice at 9:47 p.m. that same Sunday. He was Bumpy's right hand, 42 years old. Did 15 years in Sing Sing for killing a man who tried to rob his mother's grocery store. He carried a brown envelope in his left hand, holding it like it might explode. "This came under your door while you were at the church." Illinois set the envelope on the desk. Nobody saw who left it. Bumpy opened it with a letter opener, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was 1 sheet, typed on a Corona typewriter with a worn E key that sat slightly higher than the others. No signature, no date, just facts. March 6th, 11:43 p.m., corner of 143rd and 8th Avenue, black Cadillac, Connecticut plates, H7-2891. 2 men inside. Sadie Washington forced into back seat, driven north toward Bronx. "You want the truth? Follow the car." Bumpy read it 3 times, then handed it to Illinois. Connecticut plates in Harlem at midnight means someone with protection, someone who thinks geography keeps them safe. Could be a trap. Illinois set the paper down. Could be someone setting you up to go after the wrong people. Or it's someone who saw what happened and can't go to the cops. Bumpy stood, walked to the window, looked down at Lenox Avenue. "Either way, we follow the lead." He turned back. "I need 2 things. First, find out who owns that Cadillac. Connecticut DMV records. Call in favors, pay whoever you need to pay. Second, I need the coroner's report on Sadie, the real one, not the one they filed for public record." Illinois pulled out a notebook, started writing. Walsh signed that death certificate in 4 hours. That's fast for someone with no family pushing him. That's fast for someone who got paid to hurry. Bumpy sat back down. "And I want to know who made that payment." Getting Walsh's records means going through the city morgue. That's locked down tighter than Sing Sing. Illinois looked up from his notebook. "We'd need someone inside." "Then find someone inside." Bumpy's voice stayed flat. "Everyone has a price or a pressure point. Find which one works faster." Illinois nodded, put the notebook away. "What about Marcus Kid's 22? Just lost his sister. He's gonna want blood." "Let him want it." Bumpy leaned back in his chair. "But keep him away from this until we know who we're dealing with. Last thing we need is a grief-blind kid running at the wrong target." At 11:30 p.m. Illinois made 6 phone calls from a payphone 3 blocks away. The first 3 went to numbers runners who owed Bumpy favors. The 4th went to a clerk at the Connecticut DMV who supplemented his income by $30 a week selling information. The fifth went to a nurse at Harlem Hospital who had a brother doing time upstate that Bumpy could make easier or harder, depending on how cooperative she felt. The sixth call went to a morgue attendant named Frank Riley, who had gambling debts that would take him 8 years to pay off, unless someone made them disappear. By 1:15 a.m., Illinois had answers. The Cadillac belonged to Vincent Maroney, age 38, last known address in Hartford. 2 arrests for assault, 1 for extortion. All charges dropped. He worked collections for the Genovese family, which meant he broke bones for people who couldn't pay their debts and occasionally made problems disappear permanently. The coroner's report told a different story than the death certificate. Sadie's hyoid bone was fractured, which only happens from strangulation, petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes. Ligature marks consistent with rope or cord, approximately 3/8 inch diameter. Time of death estimated between 100 and 300 a.m. on March 7th. 8 hours before Walsh signed papers claiming heart failure. Illinois brought the information back to Bumpy's office at 2:30 a.m. Bumpy read through it once, then burned both documents in a metal trash can. Watched the paper turn to ash. Maroney works for the Italians, but he's in Harlem snatching up a woman who never owed anybody money in her life. Bumpy crushed the ashes with his shoe. That's not collections. That's a contract. Question is who paid for it. Illinois lit a cigarette. And why Sadie? Find out what Marcus was into 3 months ago. Bumpy walked back to his desk. Sadie didn't die because of who she was. She died because of who she was connected to. Sadie May Washington was born on September 12th. 1913 in a tenement on 131st Street where the pipes froze every winter and the rats were big enough to fight back. Her mother died when she was 8. Tuberculosis that the charity hospital couldn't treat because they ran out of beds before they ran out of patients. Her father disappeared 2 months later, left behind a daughter and a son with nobody to feed them but each other. She started working at 11. Cleaning houses for white families downtown, who paid her $2 a week and made her use the service entrance. By 14, she was waiting tables at a diner on 125th Street, lying about her age, saving every nickel she didn't spend on food. By 17, she had enough money saved to take night classes in bookkeeping at a school that didn't ask questions about high school diplomas. At 22, she was keeping books for 3 businesses in Harlem, a dry cleaner, a taxi company, and a numbers runner named Calvin Brooks who paid her 10% of what she saved him in taxes. She was clean. No drugs, no gambling, no debts. She went to Mount Olivet every Sunday, volunteered at the food bank on Wednesdays, helped old women carry groceries up 5 flights of stairs. Marcus was her only family. He was 22 now. Worked the docks unloading cargo ships, came home with his hands bleeding from rope burns and his back screaming from lifting crates that weighed more than he did. He made $32 a week when there was work, which was maybe 3 weeks out of 4. Sadie made sure he ate, made sure his rent got paid, made sure he stayed out of trouble, which in Harlem meant staying away from numbers, staying away from dope, and staying away from anyone who carried a gun for a living. In January, Marcus borrowed $500 from a loan shark named Eddie Rossini. Rossini worked for the Genovese family, charged 20% interest per month, broke fingers when people came up short. Marcus needed the money to pay hospital bills for a cousin with pneumonia. He thought he could pay it back in 3 months. He was wrong. By March, the debt had grown to $800. Rossini sent 2 men to the docks, told Marcus he had 1 week to pay or they'd start breaking things that didn't heal right. Marcus didn't have $800. He didn't have $80. He made the mistake of asking Sadie for help. She went to Rossini's office on March 5th at 4 p.m. The office was above a butcher shop on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, up a narrow staircase that smelled like raw meat and cigarette smoke. Rossini sat behind a desk, counting money. A .38 revolver sitting next to the cash like it was part of the furniture. "Your brother owes me money," Rossini said without looking up. "You here to pay it?" Sadie stood in the doorway, hands folded in front of her. "I can pay $200 now and $50 a month until it's settled." Rossini laughed, finally looked at her. "That's not how this works. Sweetheart, your brother borrowed $500. He owes $800. Full payment by Friday or he learns what broken kneecaps feel like." "He's got no way to pay $800 by Friday." Sadie's voice stayed calm. "You break his legs. He can't work. He can't work. You get nothing. Then I make an example out of him so the next guy pays on time." Rossini leaned back in his chair. "That's business. What happened next depends on who you ask." Rossini claimed Sadie threatened him, said she'd go to the cops, tell them about the loan operation. Other people in the building said they heard raised voices but couldn't make out words. What everyone agreed on was that Sadie walked out at 4:47 p.m., alive and unharmed. What nobody saw was the phone call Rossini made 10 minutes later. Vincent Maroney got his orders at 5:30 p.m. Make the problem disappear. No witnesses, no evidence, no connection back to Rossini or the family. Maroney was a professional. He'd made 17 problems disappear in 5 years. Never left evidence. Never got arrested. He drove his Cadillac to Harlem at 11 p.m. on March the 6th and waited. Sadie left her apartment at 11:38 p.m. to walk to the all-night pharmacy on 145th. Her neighbor was sick, needed medicine. Sadie was the kind of person who didn't wait until morning when someone was suffering. She made it 3 blocks before the Cadillac pulled alongside. 2 men got out. She tried to run. They caught her before she made it 10 feet. Nobody called the cops. In Harlem, you didn't call cops for anything less than a body. And sometimes, not even then. 3 people saw it happen. 2 went inside and locked their doors. 1 wrote down the license plate number, and 8 hours later slipped an envelope under Bumpy Johnson's door. Bumpy sat in his office at 4 a.m., reading the information Illinois brought back. He read about Marcus and the debt and Rossini and the meeting on March 5th. He read about Maroney and the 17 bodies nobody ever found. He read about Dr. Walsh and the death certificate signed 4 hours after Sadie's body arrived at the morgue. He set the papers down and looked at Illinois. They killed her to send a message to Marcus, but they forgot one thing. "What's that?" Illinois asked. "Sadie May Washington saved my life when I was 13 years old." Bumpy's voice was quiet as a knife sliding between ribs. "She found me bleeding in an alley after a rival gang jumped me. She stopped the bleeding, got me to a doctor, never asked for anything in return." Illinois said nothing. There was nothing to say. "So this isn't about money anymore." Bumpy stood up. "This is about the fact that there are people in Harlem you don't touch, and Sadie was one of them." Vincent Maroney's brownstone smelled like stale cigarettes and rotting garbage when Illinois kicked the door in at 2:47 a.m. No lights. No witnesses. Just the sound of wood splintering and a woman screaming 3 floors up. Maroney came out of the bedroom holding a .38 snub nose, wearing boxer shorts and nothing else. Illinois shot him in the right kneecap before he could pull the trigger. The bone exploded like a light bulb, fragments of patella spraying across hardwood floor. Maroney went down screaming, gun clattering away into darkness. Bumpy stepped over the threshold, closed what was left of the door behind him. "You killed Sadie May Washington on March 6th, strangled her with clothesline rope, dumped her body at Harlem Hospital and paid Dr. Edmund Walsh $500 to call it heart failure." Maroney was sobbing, clutching his destroyed knee. Blood pooled underneath him. black in the dim light filtering through broken blinds. I don't know what you're talking about. You've got the wrong guy. Illinois put his boot on Marinet's shattered kneecap and pressed down. The scream was high-pitched, inhuman, the sound an animal makes when it knows it's dying. Wrong answer. Try again. Okay. Okay. Marinet was hyperventilating now. Rossini hired me. Eddie Rossini, said the woman, threatened to rat him out. Bumpy pulled up a chair, sat down like they were having coffee. Tell me about the coroner. Tell me about the cops. Tell me every single person who helped you make this disappear. Walsh signed the death certificate. Donnelly made sure nobody investigated. That's all I know. Marinet's voice cracked. Please, I need a doctor. I'm bleeding out. Not yet, you're not. Bumpy leaned forward. Here's what I realized 3 days ago. If I kill you right now, nobody learns anything. The story dies with you. Walsh keeps signing fake death certificates. Donnelly keeps protecting killers. Nothing changes. Illinois kept his boot on the ruined knee. So what's the play? We don't kill him. Bumpy's voice was colder than January. We make him useful. Marinet looked up through tears and snot. Useful how? You're going to testify. Bumpy pulled out a notepad and pen. You're going to write down every name, every payment, every detail of how Sadie died. Then you're going to sign it and pray I let you live long enough to use it. They'll kill me. Rossini, the family, everyone. I'm dead if I talk. Marinet tried to crawl backward. Illinois pressed harder on the knee. Another scream. You're dead if you don't. Bumpy set the notepad on the floor. Start writing. 20 minutes later, Bumpy had 3 pages of names, dates, payments, Walsh, Donnelly, Rossini, Tony Greco, Captain Howard. A roadmap of corruption that went from the Bronx to City Hall. Marinet's signature at the bottom in shaky handwriting. Blood smeared across the paper. Illinois looked at Bumpy. Now what, we kill him anyway? No. Bumpy folded the pages, put them in his coat. We let him run. Let him tell his bosses what happened here. Let them know their whole operation is on paper now. That's a risk. Illinois pulled his boot off the destroyed knee. He could disappear. Could warn them. Let him. Bumpy stood up. Because the next person we visit isn't the killer. It's the man who decided Sadie's death didn't matter enough to investigate properly. They left Marinet bleeding on his apartment floor. He'd crawl to a phone in 15 minutes. Call an ambulance. Lie about what happened. But the confession was already locked in Bumpy's safe. The truth existed now outside of one man's memory. In the car, heading back to Harlem, Illinois asked, why not just kill all of them, Walsh? Donnelly, Rossini. Clean sweep. Because killing them is easy. Bumpy lit a cigarette. Making them destroy each other is permanent. When this is over, every cop in New York will know that covering up a murder in Harlem cost more than money can pay. The midpoint had arrived. Bumpy wasn't hunting revenge. He was rewriting the rules about who controlled death itself. Because in Harlem, the man who owned the paperwork owned reality, and Vincent Marinet had just signed his name to a new reality that would bury everyone who touched Sadie May Washington's corpse. 3 days later, Dr. Edmund Walsh would receive photographs of himself taking bribes. Detective Donnelly would find his payment logs leaked to Internal Affairs. Eddie Rossini would discover that protection money doesn't protect you when the people you paid turn on each other to save themselves. And it all started because Bumpy Johnson understood one simple truth. You don't kill the dog. You kill the man who trained it. Then every other dog becomes useless, and the whole rotten system collapses from the inside out. Doctor. Edmund Walsh answered his door at midnight, wearing pajamas and holding a Louisville Slugger, like it might stop what was coming. When he saw Bumpy standing on his porch in Queens, the bat fell from his hands and clattered down 3 steps. "I'm a city employee." Walsh's voice shook. "You can't just show up at my house. I'm not here to hurt you." Bumpy walked past him into the living room. "I'm here to show you something." Illinois followed, closed the door, locked it. Walsh backed into his coffee table, knocked over a lamp. The bulb shattered on a hardwood floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. Bumpy pulled out a manila envelope, dumped the contents on Walsh's dining table. Photographs. Dozens of them. Walsh meeting with Detective Donnelly outside a bar in the Bronx. Walsh accepting cash from a man in a gray suit. Walsh signing papers while money changed hands underneath the table like a drug deal. "These go to the New York Times tomorrow morning." Bumpy spread them out. Front page. "City coroner takes mob money to cover up murders. Your career ends. Your pension disappears. You spend 20 years in Sing Sing with men whose death certificates you falsified for cash." Walsh collapsed into a chair. "They'll kill me. Rossini. Donnelly. The family. If I change that certificate, I'm dead." "Maybe." Bumpy sat down across from him. "Or maybe they cut you loose. Maybe they decide you're not worth the heat. Maybe you die. But staying quiet means you definitely lose everything when these photos go public. That's not a choice. That's a threat." Walsh was crying now. "You're asking me to commit suicide." Illinois moved to the window, checked the street. "We're asking you to tell the truth. Sadie May Washington didn't die of heart failure. You signed papers saying she did because someone paid you $500. Now you're going to rewrite that certificate and list cause of death as strangulation. The DA will investigate. They'll ask why I got it wrong." Walsh's hands trembled. "I'll lose my medical license. You'll lose more than that if you don't." Bumpy pulled out a second folder. Inside was Marinet's signed confession naming Walsh as part of the cover-up. "Vincent Marinet already gave you up. Says you took $500 cash to rush the paperwork and bury the evidence. You're already implicated. Question is whether you go down alone or take everyone with you." Walsh read the confession twice. His face went gray. "Marinet's lying. He's trying to save himself." "Doesn't matter if he's lying." Illinois turned from the window. "What matters is, his confession is signed and dated and locked in a safe. Tomorrow morning it goes to the DA unless you rewrite that death certificate. And if I do," Walsh looked up, "if I change it to homicide, what happens to me? You tell the DA you made an error under pressure. You cooperate with the investigation. You give them Donnelly and Rossini." Bumpy stood up. "You testify and maybe you walk away with your life. Or I end up in the Hudson with my throat cut." Walsh wiped his face. "That's what happens to people who cross the Genovese family. That's what happens to people who get caught crossing them." Bumpy walked to the door. "You've got until 9 a.m. to decide. After that, your problems get solved by someone else." They left Walsh sitting at his dining table surrounded by photographs of his own corruption. Outside. The neighborhood was quiet. Dogs barking 3 houses down. Streetlights buzzing overhead. Illinois started the car. "Think he'll do it?" Illinois pulled away from the curb. "He'll do it." Bumpy lit a cigarette. "Because the alternative is worse." At 8:52 a.m. on March 19th, Dr. Edmund Walsh walked into the city records office and submitted an amended death certificate. Cause of death homicide by ligature strangulation. The clerk processing it looked at the original, looked at Walsh, asked if he was certain. Walsh signed his name and walked out. By 9:30 a.m. he was driving to Pennsylvania. He'd never return to New York, never practice medicine again. Never sleep through the night without seeing Sadie May Washington's bruised throat in his dreams. But the truth was official now, typed and signed and filed in city records. Homicide, not heart failure. And once the paperwork changed, everything else followed like dominoes falling in slow motion. Vincent Maroney made it half a block from the bar before the Chevrolet pulled alongside with no headlights. Illinois stepped out holding a sawed-off shotgun aimed at Maroney's chest. "Get in, or I paint this sidewalk with your insides." Maroney calculated his odds. Drew. Nothing. His piece was under his left arm, but drawing it meant dying before his hand touched grip. He got in the car. Bumpy sat in back, hands folded. Vincent Maroney, March 6th, 11:43 p.m. You strangled Sadie May Washington and paid a coroner to bury it. Now you're going to write down exactly how it happened. I want a lawyer. Maroney tried to sound tough. Failed. I'm not a cop. Bumpy smiled without warmth. Lawyers don't apply here. They drove to a warehouse near the Harlem River where nobody worked at night and nobody heard screaming. Illinois dragged Maroney inside by his collar, threw him against a steel beam hard enough to split his scalp open. Blood ran into his eyes. Write down what happened. Bumpy set a notepad on the concrete floor. Every name, every payment, every detail. Go fuck yourself. Maroney spat blood. Illinois grabbed Maroney's right hand, spread it flat against the beam, pulled out a claw hammer. He brought it down on Maroney's pinky finger with a wet crack that echoed through empty space. The finger bent sideways at an angle. Fingers don't bend, Maroney screamed. 9 fingers left. Illinois raised the hammer again. Start writing or I work up to your wrist. Maroney grabbed the pen with his left hand, shaking so badly the letters barely formed. Blood from his scalp dripped onto paper. He wrote, Eddie Rossini hired me. Said Sadie Washington threatened to rat him out. Paid $1,500. Other man was Tony Greco. Grabbed her on 8th Avenue. Drove to Bronx warehouse. Strangled her with clothesline. Dumped body at Harlem Hospital 3:47 a.m. Rossini paid. Doctor, Walsh 500 to sign at heart failure. Detective Donnelly made sure nobody investigated. Bumpy read it twice. Sign your name. Maroney signed. Hand trembling. Illinois grabbed him again, dragged him back to the car. They drove to White Plains, gave him $20, put him on a train heading west. Show your face in New York before we say so. And I'll finish what I started with that hammer. Maroney got on a train to Chicago at 4:17 a.m. Never looked back. Never returned. Spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows, knowing that confessing on paper was the only thing keeping him alive. By sunrise, Bumpy had Maroney's signed statement locked in his safe. Every name, every crime, every detail of how Sadie died and who helped cover it up. The truth existed now in Maroney's own handwriting, signature at the bottom making it impossible to deny. Illinois cleaned blood off the claw hammer in a sink at the warehouse. What's next? Next we deliver this to the DA. Bumpy folded the confession, and we watched the system eat itself. Because the truth wasn't just evidence. It was a bomb. And Bumpy Johnson had just lit the fuse that would blow up every cop, every coroner, every mob enforcer who thought Sadie May Washington's death didn't matter enough to care about. The amended death certificate hit city records at 9:04 a.m. on March 19th. By 11:30 a.m., 3 departments had flagged it. By 2 p.m., the DA opened an investigation. By 5 p.m., reporters were calling the morgue asking why a heart attack victim suddenly died of strangulation. Walsh didn't answer. He'd fled to Pennsylvania, leaving behind a career and a house he'd never see again. His supervisor told reporters it was clerical error. Nobody believed him. Clerical errors don't change heart failure to murder. Detective Frank Donnelly heard about it at 6 p.m. over dinner. His partner mentioned it casually. Some coroner changed a death certificate today. Woman who died of a heart attack actually got strangled. Weird, right? Donnelly's fork stopped midair. What was her name? Sadie Washington, Harlem resident. Donnelly left his steak half-eaten and drove straight to Eddie Rossini's office. Walsh changed the death certificate. It's officially homicide now. Rossini stopped counting money. What do you mean he changed it? We paid him to keep it buried. Well, it's dug up. Donnelly paced. DA's investigating. They'll want Walsh, and when they find him, he'll fold. Then we find him first. Rossini grabbed his coat, and we make sure he stops talking permanently. But Walsh was already gone. And on March 20th, the New York Times received anonymous photographs of Walsh taking bribes. They ran page 3 the next morning. Coroner under investigation for bribery. Captain Howard saw it over coffee at 7 a.m. Called Donnelly immediately. Tell me you're not involved with this Washington woman. I'm not. Donnelly lied badly. DA wants to talk to you. Internal Affairs is involved. Howard's voice was ice. If you're dirty, Frank, you're alone. I can't protect you. Donnelly hung up and stared at nothing. 8 years of bribes. $200 a month to look away when the mob moved product. Easy money then. Death sentence now. On March 21st, Bumpy's lawyer delivered Marinet's confession to the DA in a sealed envelope. Anonymous source. Confidential. The DA read it twice and issued warrants for Rossini, Donnelly, and Tony Greco. Rossini heard at 4 p.m., packed a suitcase, drove toward Canada, made it to Albany before state troopers pulled him over for broken taillight. Found $10,000 cash and a loaded .38 in the trunk. Arrested him on weapons charges, handed him to NYPD when they saw the warrant. Donnelly turned himself in at 9 a.m. on March 22nd with his lawyer. Decided cooperation was his only play. Gave up Howard. Gave up payment logs. Gave up 12 other cops on the Genovese payroll. DA offered 15 years instead of life. He took it. Tony Greco disappeared. Some said Florida. Others said Cuba. The truth was uglier and simpler. Illinois found him at a Yonkers bar on March 23rd. Followed him home. Put 2 bullets in the back of his head in an alley behind his apartment. Body found 3 days later. Dental records. Murder never solved. Howard resigned March 24th before Internal Affairs finished. Lost his pension. Lost his reputation. Moved to Arizona. Died of a heart attack in 1952 alone in a trailer park. Forgotten. Walsh never returned. Got a job in Pennsylvania where nobody asked questions. Died in 1961 liver failure from drinking a bottle of whiskey every night for 13 years. Haunted by bodies he'd signed away for cash. The system didn't collapse. It cannibalized itself. The people protecting Sadie's killers turned on each other to survive. And in the chaos, truth came out. Not because anyone wanted justice, but because Bumpy made silence more dangerous than speaking. By March 28th, every New York paper ran stories about corruption in the coroner's office and NYPD. Mayor promised reforms. Commissioner fired 18 cops. DA bragged about cleaning up organized crime. And Sadie May Washington's death was officially listed as homicide. Her killers facing trial. Bumpy read the coverage in his office above the barbershop. Didn't celebrate. Just folded the paper, set it aside. Went back to work. Because in Harlem, justice wasn't something you celebrated. It was something you enforced when the system failed. And the system always failed. April 3rd, 1948. 2:00 p.m. Mount Olivet Baptist Church. 412 people packed into pews built for 250. Standing room only. Bodies pressed against walls. Nobody wanted to miss this. The coffin was open this time. No makeup, no cover-up, no lies. Sadie May Washington's throat was visible to everyone who filed past. Purple-black ligature marks circling her neck like evidence that couldn't be erased. Rope burns deep enough that you could see where the fibers had bitten into skin, held tight until she stopped breathing. Reverend Thomas Price didn't apologize for showing the truth. Didn't explain why the first funeral had been a lie. Just let 412 people see what strangulation looks like when nobody's paid to hide it. Marcus Washington sat front row. Same borrowed suit, different eyes. Not hollow anymore. Not broken. Cold and clear like a man who'd watched justice happen slowly and understood exactly what it cost. The death certificate was official now, filed with the city on March 19th at 9:04 a.m. Cause of death: homicide by ligature strangulation. Not heart failure. Not natural causes. Murder. Vincent Marinet's signed confession was entered into evidence on March 21st. 3 pages, single-spaced, every name, every payment, every detail of how Sadie died and who helped cover it up. Eddie Rossini was in Rikers awaiting trial. Detective Frank Donnelly had turned state's witness to save his own skin. Tony Greco was 6 feet under in an unmarked grave, 2 bullets in the back of his head. Dr. Edmund Walsh was hiding in Pennsylvania, drinking a bottle of whiskey every night, trying to forget the bodies he'd signed away for cash. Bumpy Johnson stood in the back row, same spot as 3 weeks ago. Same charcoal suit, same position with his back to the wall. He didn't sit, didn't speak, just watched. Reverend Price read Psalm 23 again. This time his voice didn't shake. This time his hands didn't grip the pulpit like it might save him from drowning. Sadie May Washington was murdered. Price said the word clearly. Let it hang in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Not taken by God, not claimed by illness, murdered by men who thought they could hide behind badges and death certificates and mob protection. 2 uniformed cops stood near the door. Different ones than last time. These 2 looked straight ahead, faces blank, knowing that every eye in the church saw them as representatives of the system that had failed Sadie. They didn't move, didn't speak, just absorbed the weight of 412 people's judgment. After the service, people filed out slowly. Nobody rushed. Nobody whispered. They moved like mourners at a real funeral instead of witnesses to a cover-up. That difference mattered more than any newspaper headline or courtroom verdict. Bumpy waited until the church was almost empty. Then he walked down the center aisle toward the coffin. His footsteps echoed the same way they had 3 weeks ago when he'd exposed the makeup-hiding rope burns. When he'd turned a lie into truth by dragging 2 fingers across a dead woman's throat. Marcus stood up as Bumpy approached. You did this. You made them tell the truth. I made staying quiet more expensive than speaking up. Bumpy stopped at the coffin, looked down at Sadie's face one last time. The truth was always there. I just forced people to acknowledge it. An old woman approached from the side aisle, moving slow on arthritic knees. She was 70-something. Gray hair pulled back tight, black dress mended so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. Her eyes were Sadie's eyes. Same shape, same dark brown that saw through lies. Mrs. Washington, Bumpy turned to face her. I'm sorry I couldn't save her. Nobody could save her once those men decided she was a problem. Sadie's mother reached into her purse with shaking hands. But you made them pay for it. She pulled out a photograph. Black and white, edges worn soft from decades of handling. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, standing in front of a tenement building, smiling despite broken front steps and boarded windows behind her. Sadie at 7. before the world taught her that being good didn't protect you from being killed. She saved your life when you were a boy. Mrs. Washington pressed the photograph into Bumpy's hand. Found you bleeding in an alley after a rival gang jumped you. Stopped the bleeding with her own dress. Got you to a doctor. Bumpy stared at the photograph. Remembered being 13 and stupid, getting jumped by rivals, waking up in a doctor's office with a girl he didn't know sitting beside him, making sure he didn't die alone. I didn't know it was her until after. His voice was quieter than usual. By the time I figured it out, she was already dead. But you remembered. Mrs. Washington's hand touched his arm. And you made her death mean something instead of letting it disappear like they wanted. She turned and walked back toward Marcus. Bumpy stood there holding the photograph of a 7-year-old girl who'd grow up to save a stranger's life, who'd get murdered for threatening to expose a loan shark's operation. He folded the photograph carefully, put it in his inside jacket pocket, next to where he carried his .45 automatic. He carried it for the rest of his life. Never showed it to anyone, never talked about it, just kept it there as a reminder that some debts can't be repaid, only honored. Outside, Harlem was waking up to a new reality. Newspapers running daily updates about the corruption investigation. 3 more cops arrested. Captain Howard resigned. The Genovese family pulling back from Harlem operations. Bumpy walked down the church steps into April sunlight. Illinois waited at the bottom, leaning against a Chevrolet, smoking a cigarette. "It's done," Illinois said. Not a question. "It's done." Bumpy got in the passenger seat. Sadie's death is on record as murder. Her killers are facing trial or dead. The cops who covered it up are exposed. That's as close to justice as Harlem gets. Illinois started the engine. They drove back toward Lenox Avenue in silence. Behind them, mourners filed out of Mount Olivet Baptist Church. No screaming, no crying, just quiet acceptance. The truth had finally been spoken. The people responsible had paid for trying to bury it. Justice in Harlem wasn't loud. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fast. But it was thorough. And it always came due. 3 months after Sadie May Washington's second funeral. Harlem looked the same but operated different. The numbers rackets still ran. The speakeasies still poured bootleg whiskey. The cops still took bribes. But something fundamental had shifted in how power worked north of 110th Street. July 1948. Eddie Rossini went to trial, prosecuted for murder for hire. Based on Vincent Marinet's signed confession and Detective Donnelly's testimony, trial lasted 8 days. Jury deliberated 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge sentenced him to death by electric chair. November 12, 1948. 11:07 p.m. Sing Sing. 3,000 volts stopped his heart. Pronounced dead 4 minutes later. Detective Frank Donnelly got his 15-year deal. Served 11 before parole. Never worked in law enforcement again. Died in 1967. Liver cancer. Alone in a VA hospital. Nobody came to his funeral except a nephew who needed to make sure he was actually dead. Vincent Marinet stayed in Chicago until 1952. Then moved to Los Angeles under a fake name. Worked as a truck driver. Married twice. Died in 1971 when his rig jackknifed on the interstate outside Bakersfield. The clawhammer scar on his right hand was still visible when they pulled his body from the wreckage. Dr. Edmund Walsh drank himself to death in Pennsylvania. 1961. The coroner who signed his death certificate listed cause as cirrhosis of the liver. Technically accurate, but it ignored the guilt that drove him to empty a bottle of whiskey every night for 13 years. Those endings were just footnotes. The real story was what happened in Harlem after everyone learned what Bumpy Johnson did to the people who killed Sadie May Washington and tried to cover it up. The lesson wasn't subtle. It wasn't complicated. It was carved into the collective memory of every criminal, every cop, every politician who operated in Harlem. Don't touch the people Bumpy protects. Don't falsify death certificates. Don't think bribes and badges make you untouchable. Because Bumpy Johnson will dismantle your entire operation piece by piece. Turn your allies against you. Make sure your name ends up in newspaper headlines as a cautionary tale. Other crime bosses took notice. Dutch Schultz, who'd been pushing into Harlem's numbers rackets, pulled back. The Genovese family stopped sending collectors into Harlem without explicit permission. The police department rotated out half the officers in the 28th precinct, told the new ones that Harlem wasn't worth the corruption charges. August 1948. Stephanie Saint. Claire sat in her office above a dress shop on 7th Avenue, counting receipts. "You didn't just kill the people who murdered Sadie," she said. "You killed the idea that anyone could get away with it." Bumpy sat across from her, smoking a cigarette. "I didn't kill an idea. I enforced a rule that already existed." He exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "You don't murder innocent people in Harlem and expect to walk away." The cops thought they could. The mob thought they could. Stephanie crushed numbers in her ledger. "You taught them different. I taught them that patience beats rage." Bumpy crushed his cigarette in an ashtray. "Everyone expected me to pull a gun at the funeral and start shooting. Instead, I touched Sadie's neck and exposed the makeup. That moment made everything else inevitable. Because you didn't react emotionally." Stephanie looked up. "You reacted strategically. Emotion gets you killed." Bumpy's voice was flat. "Strategy gets your enemies to kill each other." The strategy was simple in hindsight. Required iron discipline to execute. Step 1. Expose the lie publicly so nobody could pretend they didn't know. Step 2. Gather evidence that implicated everyone involved. Step 3. Force the system to choose between protecting criminals or protecting itself. Step 4. Wait for self-preservation instincts to kick in. Watch the dominoes fall. No dramatic shootouts. No bodies stacked in alleys. Just relentless pressure applied to the weakest points until the whole structure collapsed from internal rot. August 1948. Marcus Washington visited Bumpy's office, knocked twice, waited to be invited in, sat down across from Bumpy's desk. "I want to work for you," Marcus said. "I want to learn what you know. What I know gets people killed." Bumpy leaned back in his chair. "Your sister died because she got too close to dangerous people. You sure you want to follow that path?" "My sister died because someone thought she didn't matter." Marcus's voice was steady. "You proved she did. I want to learn how to do that." Bumpy studied him for a long moment. "You don't learn this from books. You learn it from watching, from waiting, from understanding that power isn't about who can hit hardest. It's about who can endure longest. Then teach me to endure." Marcus didn't blink. Bumpy nodded once. "Understand this. What we do isn't justice, it's consequences. We make sure people pay for their actions when the system fails to collect. That's all. That's enough." Marcus stood up. "That's more than most people get." Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack, age 62. His funeral at Mount Olivet Baptist Church drew over 1,000 people. No cops caused trouble. No rival gangs showed disrespect. Just a community acknowledging that the man who enforced consequences when the law failed was gone. Marcus Washington spoke at the funeral. "Bumpy Johnson taught me that justice isn't loud. It's patient. It's thorough. It doesn't celebrate. It just stands firm until the truth has no choice but to surface." In his inside jacket pocket, Bumpy was buried with a photograph. A 7-year-old girl standing in front of a tenement building. Sadie May Washington at 7. Before the world taught her that being good didn't protect you from violence. The photograph nobody knew he carried for 14 years. The reminder that some debts can only be honored, never repaid. The rule Harlem never forgot was simple. When the law stays silent, someone has to speak. When the system fails, someone has to enforce consequences. When innocent people die and officials cover it up, someone has to make the cost of that cover-up more expensive than telling the truth. Bumpy Johnson made sure that cost was paid in full. For the next 20 years, police corruption in Harlem dropped to nearly zero. Not because cops became more honest, but because they learned what happened when you crossed Bumpy Johnson. They learned he had eyes and ears everywhere. They learned their own corruption would eventually be used against them. Most importantly, they learned you can't defeat a man who has the respect and support of his entire community. Real power doesn't come from badges or guns or violence. Real power comes from understanding people, from building networks, from turning your enemy's weaknesses against them. Bumpy Johnson proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's knowledge. It's patience. It's the ability to see 10 moves ahead while your enemies are still figuring out their first move. And when the trap finally closed, it wasn't with violence or threats. It was with the truth. If this story gave you chills, smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the like if you understand that real power doesn't come from guns, it comes from patience, strategy, and knowing exactly when to strike. Drop a comment and tell me. Would you have given them 72 hours like Bumpy did? Or would you have acted immediately? What would you have done when you saw that makeup covering rope burns at the funeral? Because here's the truth. What Bumpy did to expose Sadie's killers was just the beginning. What he did next changed Harlem forever in ways nobody saw coming. Turn on those notifications because tomorrow, we're revealing something about Bumpy Johnson that most people don't know. Something that made even the most powerful men in New York afraid to speak his name. See you tomorrow. Don't miss it. Remember, in Harlem, the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun. It was knowing exactly who your enemies really were.